The previous basket is under review.
Scout team's back. Countdown to Selection Sunday very much on. Apologies, we've been away from you guys for about 2 weeks. Fawcett was out of the country, and then he came back, and I was bedridden with the flu for a couple of days. It happens, folks. Glad to get it out of the way before the NCAA tournament, before the big run. But thank you for bearing with us. Hope you guys have been held over by a great batch of Basket Under Review content. Please subscribe, check it out. We wanted to come back, Fawcett, with a video breaking down some of the teams that maybe were written off a little bit early in the season, considered maybe disappointing, fair or not, and have turned it around, and really in major ways in some cases. Obviously, St. John's a great example of that. Florida now trending towards the national title, and then a couple other big brands as well, with Kentucky and North Carolina that each went through sort of like a oh shit moment, like here it comes, collapse is imminent, and both have kept the train on the tracks. And Kentucky in particular has really stabilized into one of the better teams in the SEC, which I think is pretty impressive and a credit to Mark Pope given how criticized he was at points this season. So Fawcett, I guess welcome back, and looking forward to the stretch run here with you.
Yeah, this is great. I know it's been a couple of weeks, but that also meant storylines could really accumulate here. And while we might normally do a video on like one team's turnaround, I felt like there was a bunch we needed to talk about. So this will be a fun one. And it's something that I love about our sport just generally is it is such a long season, which, some coaches lament, but it also means that you can have these stretches where you might not play really well, but you've got the chance to bounce back. And also it's not a sport where if you lose 1 or 2 games that you shouldn't, your season is done. And of course it's still the regular college basketball media cycle where right about now people are like, oh, this is why you never write off a team in the fall, because you never know what could happen. And then like fast forward to the fall next year and people are going to say like, hey, X team is cooked because of this. So that will continue to happen. And there were a couple of teams here that were declared dead that I think are looking pretty good right now. So it'll be fun to kind of talk about, okay, like, well, what was there to it? What changed? And what does it mean about the way rosters are built, the way that basketball is played? Because I do think there's some larger takeaways as well. And that's what's also fun about looking at a couple of team situations as opposed to just, maybe one team's turnaround.
Yeah, no doubt. Let's start with Florida, who was criticized much throughout November and December, obviously played a brutal non-conference schedule, but had a couple of losses in there that I think were legitimately concerning at the time. TCU, Missouri, those were not great performances. Florida wasn't playing great. Their offense scuffled at points, the lack of shooting, a problem, but they have really turned the corner. They dominate you on the backboard. Certainly one of the, statistically the best rebounding team of the Ken Pom era, I believe is the stat right now. Ruben Chinielu has been ridiculous. And, I think they've found some answers in terms of how to tool around those guys, right? I think Fland has stabilized and been much better of late, taking care of the basketball. They've been able to trust Urban Klavjar more in his shooting. Isaiah Brown, I pointed this out on Twitter on Saturday when they were playing Kentucky, him giving them just like 15 energy minutes a game on the wing is something they really lacked early in the year and didn't really trust CJ Ingram in the same way. So, for me, I think when you watch Florida, it's not like, oh man, like draw the line in the sand. This is the one big thing that changed. It's just these little accumulations. And when you are as high floor as they are with their physicality and toughness on the glass, it all sort of waves forward very quickly.
Yeah, I do feel like all the recent success has really come on the defensive end. I think this is a possession that like everyone watched a million times on Twitter, but like Chinielu just guarding the entire floor and a couple of the better scorers in the SEC. And this was a guy who was, had cement feet last year and was someone who could be picked on the perimeter. And now he's, locking guys down and starting to get some buzz as like maybe one of the best defenders in the country. And I do feel like that's something that Florida has been able to kind of have success with is playing these big lineups, but no one's really able to actually pick on the mismatches that can happen from that. And some of it is due to, yes, guys are really good defenders. Some of it is due to teams are just not very good at attacking mismatches at the college game. But whatever the case may be, is you'll kind of watch these teams try to ISO against these bigs, whether it's Hauk or Conan or Hanlocked or Chinyelu, and they just don't have a whole lot of success with it. And the offense still has a lot of warts, in my opinion. And we're not going to get into that with this film, but it's really interesting. And I think when it comes to the sustainability of Florida, it's like it's not like they suddenly started hitting a bunch of shots and you're like, okay, well, that's going to go down. Like their half court offense has still been not very good, but because their defense and rebounding is just so dominant, they're making things happen. And again, while their half court offense has been pretty poor, when they're just getting stops and they still have 7-footers that are getting down the floor first all the time, they're still having a lot of success putting up points in a hurry and turning those defensive possessions into offense. And I find that to be kind of an interesting topic because it really challenges what you think about winning in March when we get there. So often it's kind of been a conversation of like, okay, well, like you need guards to win in March. And yes, Boogie Fland is playing better. Xavier Lee is playing a little bit better. I mean, I've always thought Boogie Fland's defense is extremely underrated. The offense still kind of is what it is to an extent, but the one guy that is giving them a spark, I should mention, is Urban Klobzar, which has been just much needed. Someone who's shooting 42% from three in SEC play and has kind of sneakily played a lot more than Xavier Lee over the last couple of weeks. We have seen, Xavier Lee play better and playing more minutes against Kentucky, but Klobzar has been like the one spark they've kind of needed. But it has their guard play really turned a corner. Like I would argue not really. The guards play still kind of is what it is, but the defense just really is that overwhelming. And for a sport that's always been like, you need guards to win in March, Florida is going to challenge that. And I think that, maybe we just saw a Super Bowl where like Sam Darnold won and it was always like, yeah, win a Super Bowl without an elite quarterback. Well, Seahawks just won with Sam Darnold. Maybe Florida is going to be able to win without elite guard play, but it's great. Or I find it really interesting in that they did not like address their biggest problem in order to make a turnaround. They just like doubled down on what was good. And that almost makes it feel sustainable to me.
Yeah. I think they almost had like a come to Jesus of like, hey guys, like Boogie, like it's not happening, dude. Right. Like we can't keep bombing from three. We're shooting 18%. Right. Xavier, like we need you. Like it's actually, it's an interesting dichotomy of, I don't think there's any question that Todd is really confident in those guys and pours confidence into them, lets them play through mistakes. Goodness, they make them, right? But at the same time, they've kind of reined them in a little bit in terms of the shots that they're taking, have limited, they've taken a much lower 3-point rate in SEC play than they did in the non-conference. So I think those are like the minor things, right? They haven't, overhauled how they play. It's just shoot a little bit less from three, really lean into what we've done well. Turn it over less. That's a huge part of this, right? Like every possession for Florida where a shot goes on the rim is an amazing possession because they rebound 42% of their misses, right? So if Ruben Chinyelu and Alex Conan are flying at the basket, just throw it up there. Like you have a great chance of stealing 2 points just on an offensive rebound putback, or that's how you get your best threes, right? Like Xavier off of an offensive rebound is a great three for them. Klobzar is a monster on those catch and shoot threes off of offensive rebounds. So I think they've just sort of realized like we're better than everybody as long as we put the ball on the rim. It doesn't even have to go in. And they've turned it from here. They're really good. I do think part of it's the SEC. The SEC is not elite. Right, they're not getting really pushed by the best of the best in the SEC because there isn't an elite tier of the SEC right now. It's just Florida to me, but I think they're a clear Final Four level team at this point, and I like the fact that when you think about Arizona and you think about Michigan, you think about all the other top teams in the country, like they're one of the few teams, Florida, that has the size to truly match up and battle and, scrap and claw neck and neck, maybe win that battle up front. They lost it against Arizona the first time, but I think if you played it again, feel pretty good that Florida wins the front court matchup. And if they win the front court, good chance to win the game. So I'm impressed with them. Don't think they were ever as bad as people maybe made it sound, but there were some results in there. And look, I think when you're the defending national champion, it's fair to have high expectations that they didn't meet for the first 6 weeks and have certainly turned it around here since.
Yeah, and I think that's going to be something that will like for Florida, looking back on playing a national championship game against Houston, who like kind of plays a different style. Like Houston shot a very good 3-point percentage, but they like hardly took them. And of course, something we've talked about so much on this channel is just how many mid-range jump shots Houston takes, how many they took in that national championship game. But you look at Houston, who essentially rode defense and rebounding to one possession, being within one possession of a championship. And I think if you're Florida, you're like, okay, well, that's the ceiling. And I think last year we went into March thinking like there was a number of really elite teams. And I don't know if we feel that same way about the top of the sport this year. So could Florida, rock fight their way to a championship game like Houston, but not run into a team as good as, Florida was last year? It's possible. But at the same time, you're like, yeah, could a team that's playing in a one and done scenario that can like plays up a little bit, handle Florida's physicality, but then they're much better in a half court game. They have more shots than the Gators. Like you could see them taking like a slightly earlier loss. I don't think you could see them ever losing a 2-15 game.
No.
It just seems like the size is too overwhelming. You'd really like their chance in most, but could they bow out in a Sweet 16 while not playing very well? Like, yeah, you could see that, but it's also, you don't have to squint much more anymore to see them winning a championship.
The other thing I would say, and then we'll close the book on Florida, the top 10 teams in KenPom, I was looking at this morning. The top 10 teams in KenPom are all top 50 offensive rebound teams, right? And we talk so much about Florida rebounding through the context of how well they offensive rebound, but I think it's probably under-discussed how well they defensive rebound and how important that is when you consider how much these other top teams in the country are all relying on stealing extra possessions just the way Florida does, right? Florida not only is going to get its share on the glass back themselves, they're going to do an elite job of preventing you a big part of your offense. And I think that would be very important if we get a Arizona-Florida rematch or a Florida-Illinois game. Obviously, Illinois super values that. So I think that's something to watch as well. Another team that needs to transition that has leaned into playing big, leaned into being physical, and has just sort of bludgeoned its way and rock fought its way to wins here of late is St. John's. St. John's was certainly at sort of a come to Jesus moment. It was bumpy. They were, I think, deservingly criticized at 9-5, losing to Providence early in Big East play. They haven't lost since January 3rd. They're rolling. They could very well win out. I do think they probably lose at UConn in a week and a half or so, but they have turned the corner. Again, part of that is schedule. The Big East is not very good outside of the top tier of the league, but they've handled their business. And I think since Dylan Mitchell entered the lineup and they've just said like Mitchell, Hopkins, Ejiofor, plus, I think Dylan Darling has been critical as well, at the point. It's just, I think it's changed their team a little bit, and they've redefined who they are after being maybe a little too combo guard chucker reliant early in the season.
Yeah, Rick Pitino, always known as someone who's such a, obviously great coach, one of the best ever. But I feel like something that doesn't get discussed as much about like just the actual way he coaches is that he's never been super tied to a style of play, particularly offensively. He's always been such a player development guy. He's always been to get guys to play smart, play hard, and then just kind of figure out the style of play from there. So it wasn't really hard for them to change their style of play once they were like, okay, we're just going to play all these big guys and we're going to look for mismatches and hunt smaller players. And you kind of see that now with three guys on the floor who can kind of dominate physically. They're just finding whoever the weakest third defender is on the other team, usually in terms of legitimate weakest as in size, not like bad defender. And they're throwing that guy on the block. They're running all these off ball actions to make it really difficult to fight through. If teams want to switch on those, they still feel pretty good about the matchups. And then I think the insertion of Dylan Mitchell, that's where they still kind of keep that high octane pace while still playing really big. And that's something that I found him to be kind of really fun and like someone who kind of keeps the energy up while still playing that kind of grinding style. We know Rick Pitino doesn't have the point guards he might traditionally like, but if you keep the ball in the hands of these other guys, that works. And then also just defensively, which we know matters to Pitino the most, they're able to be so aggressive on the perimeter because there's just so much size everywhere, and it's not always just guys blocking shots, flying over and swatting something off the backboard. It's just, teams see length and they start to like they hear footsteps, and you see teams just throwing up bricks at the rim even if they aren't blocked. They still have kind of concern once they see all that size, and that's been pretty interesting as well. So yeah, and another team too, you mentioned the kind of difference in offensive and defense rebounding with Florida. It is quite interesting to see. Like, I feel like so many times teams get talked about as this team is a good rebounding team, and that's like the level of analysis. But there's a lot of teams that have a lot of major differences in the way they offensive and defensive rebound. And St. John's has been so good on the offensive glass, but they actually, like, shockingly have still been giving up a lot on the defensive glass. And that's kind of something to monitor. Despite the size, they don't really kind of get rebounds out of their area. But when it comes to the way they play offense and guys all the way around there, they're getting all kinds of extra possessions. And it's another team that feels very high floor because of the way they're playing. And the turnaround does seem like, again, it's not been fueled by them hitting 50% of their threes for, a couple of games here. It's been something that I do find sustainable, certainly in that league, but also something that's not going to be very fun for anyone to play against in the NCAA tournament.
Yeah. Yeah. I went and saw them a couple of weeks ago against DePaul, and they played terribly, quite frankly, but they just they're just hard to score on at the basket. Like, when you have three big guys on the floor that are all pretty athletic, that all play really hard and all play with a level of physicality, like, it's really tough to deal with. And I think Ejiofor might be the most underrated player in the country. I know people talk about him now, and Rick heaps his praise, but like, that guy is just a monster. Like, energy giver, tone setter, rebounds, can really pass now, like, gets fouled, makes a shot occasionally if you don't guard him. Like, the guy is a beast. And I just think, like, I want to go to war with that guy in March, right? Same thing with Chinyelu, right? And when you have guys in your front court that can guard in every coverage, that rebound their nuts off, like, you're probably going to be pretty good. And I think that there's certainly some similarities there between Florida and St. John's. I do, again, I wonder what it looks like when they have to play more top tier teams, right? They've played, basically 2 games against tournament competition since the start of the new year. But at the same time, and they'll play 2 more basically before conference tournament time, and UConn and Nova here at the end of the month. But I certainly think, like, second weekend at minimum is the goal expectation, given what happened last year, certainly, and the other pressure. It's Pitino. How many more years of this do you have? And not wanting to waste Zuby, right? I think that's certainly a realistic aspiration. And single elimination game, I'll take Pitino on the sideline over just about anyone. So certainly impressed with the job they've done to turn it around. And also, another thing I'll just say quickly on St. John's before we swing it to Kentucky, and this is true for all 4 of these teams. None of these rosters were cheap. None of these fan bases were going to be patient. Maybe Florida a little bit because they won the championship last year, but like, even them know, right? Like you give a lot of credit to all the people in the locker room with all 4 of these teams for, like, not letting it break when it hit the skids a little bit, because, like, it was very negative. And it would have been very easy if you're St. John's and you're a player to say, yeah, we just don't have a point guard. We're not that good. Like, we're not what we were supposed to be. And a lot of these guys are seniors and could say, hey, like, let me just cash my checks and put my feet up and cruise on to around a 32 exit and go move on with my life. And they haven't. They've doubled down and tripled down. So credit to St. John's, and really credit again across the board with all 4 of these groups. And that brings us to maybe the most toxic of places, Kentucky, where things were really bad, really ugly. Occasionally it still is. They got murdered by Vanderbilt. They dig themselves more 15+ point lead or deficit, than any Kentucky team you could ever remember. But these guys have some, like, serious resolve and serious moxie. And I think it's helped them to just have lineup stability, for better or worse. Like, losing these guys has just forced Pope to kind of play with what he's got. And what he's got is still a pretty good team. I mean, Chandler and Moreno are both really good. Aberdeen, has had a nice season in the SEC. And I think at its core, what was really critical and has certainly helped them the most is Otega-Oweh has turned the corner and been close to the SEC Player of the Year type candidate that we thought he'd be in the preseason.
So I wanted to start this by going back to the game against Gonzaga where things were, particularly rough. And I will say, Sweeney, when I just hear, oh, this team just they're not working hard enough. They don't want it enough. They don't have enough pride in the low. Like, I'll be honest, I start to roll my eyes a little bit because I always think it's a little bit of lazy analysis to just be like, this team doesn't work hard enough and that's why they're losing. Sure, I'm sure there's an element of that. Maybe you can speak to that more than I. But when I looked at how they played early in the season, I thought there was clear schematic problems. Here's some of this 5-out stuff that obviously Pope really likes to play. But watch these possessions as like no one's actually using the dribble handoffs. No one's using the zooms for advantages. They're just sitting behind the screen. No one's getting downhill. Miscommunications. Let's watch the next one here. Watch how narrow their offense goes. So as you see these kind of or dribble handoffs running into bodies, there's no spacing. There's nowhere to go. Same thing here. We get a touch. So this is what a lot of people will remember at BYU, throw it into a trail 5, cut off it. But again, look how narrow it is. This chin screen is going to come. What angle is there to make this pass? The chin screen right there. They cut through. There's nothing there. The spacing of the offense is bad. The schematics of what they're doing is bad. The execution of what they're doing is bad. And like, yeah, you can say, yeah, this team doesn't want it enough. Like, I'm looking at their offense and like, this is poorly executed, poorly designed offense. Same thing here. Look at that wide pin down where the pin down happened right in the middle of the floor. So as he came off that screen, nowhere to go. Everything is being run like in a phone booth, it looks like. And again, so I was watching all these games. This is just one example. I thought for weeks it was really bad. Now watch more recently, starting with the Tennessee game. Look how much wider they get. Look how much they're operating out of the outer thirds so that when they run a wide pin down or a stagger, there's actually somewhere for the ball handler to go. And look how much harder they are to guard when guys are running wide. There's multiple actions on the same play. It's not, oh, we're going to get a zoom, but the guy's just going to sit behind the screen and like magically hope something happens. Just a lot more in your face. Here's a shuffle screen. If that's not there, okay, we're going to get into a stagger. We're going to try to make you guard on multiple actions. Look, the first curl isn't there, but because we've got wide enough, we can get you on the other side of the man. So I don't think it was just like, oh, look at Kentucky. They don't value the logo enough. They don't respect the brand enough. I do think that Pope's staff needed to make some changes with how they play. This is not how they were playing early in the season. And I think they're having a lot more success with this style. And then I do think, of course, what you were talking about with Otega-Oweh, I've always been a fan of his game just because, again, as you're looking at all this stuff that wasn't working early in the season with just all the like throw it to the trail post and have guys cut off it and hope that something happens. Like sometimes you just need someone who can just get downhill, someone who uses the advantages from a zoom and gets downhill. And now that they're spacing better, they're actually using some of the advantages created. They're actually starting to get a little bit more downhill, a lot more paint touch, and they're a lot more difficult to guard. And Otega-Oweh just remains their best player at that skill. Had some really good moments against Florida, created some challenges there, but just the general rim pressure, the general attack has been so much there. But at the same time, I still look at a lot of their roster and they're playing a better style. It still doesn't feel exactly like the pieces work. It still feels like they do have to work really hard for these buckets by making them run so many actions, by executing stuff really well. I still cannot and will not get over the roster construction. And I know that some people are looking at this as some kind of like win that you can lose 3 main players and still be second in the SEC or third, wherever they are now at the time of recording. But I always think, Sweeney, about like Daryl Morey, who kind of started the system of like, let's get James Harden and surround him with role players and have the super team. Let's concentrate our cap at the top. And I remember at the Sloan Analytics conference one time, someone said like, oh, well, do you not realize like if you put all this cap money towards people at the top and one of those guys gets injured, like you're not going to win a championship. And he's like, yeah, if you build a really deep team, even if one of your good players gets injured, you're still not winning a championship. That's still kind of what I look at with Kentucky and the way they were built. They were built with this like, really deep team. And like, yeah, it's nice that they can, withstand some injuries and be okay. But like, I don't think they're winning a championship. And that's something too, where we've talked about it on this show before. And I just think for a lot of teams, I'm still in that NBA mode of, I think you should concentrate some of your money at the top, get the best top end players available, and fill in with complementary role players. I don't feel like this team had the top end talent. They obviously with some injuries don't, and I also don't know if the role pieces fit great. It is wonderful to see that they are playing better. It's also kind of notable to me, and yes, I know like preseason expectations, but like while they were like really struggling, they kind of remained high in KenPom, and as they're like turning it around, they're kind of have dropped in KenPom. And I just wonder if, of course, to an extent, that's just kind of like normalizing and water finding its level. But I think they are for real as a good, solid team. I don't know if this is like a full turnaround. However, I'm curious to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I 100% agree. Right. I think it's I give Pope credit because I think this went from like royal screw up that could completely define his tenure to, okay, we kind of had a bad year with a bunch of that we screwed up some and we had some bad luck with injuries and we kind of stuck the landing, especially if they could, grind their way to a Sweet 16, which is not unreasonable at this point, right? Like, they'll probably be an underdog in a second round game, but they've positioned themselves seeding wise to be, in like a 4-5 or a 3-6, type situation where, all right, cool. Like that's a winnable game if you're Kentucky. Right. And so I think that's the win. And again, like this could have gone really, really bad. I think you're 1,000% right about roster construction. I think you're 1,000% right. Just generally about, these are not the right necessarily pieces. And I think just generally like they should be a lot more talented for what they have financially. But, again, I think what I would say is, when you watched Kentucky last year, I always felt like, man, that looks like a hard team to play against, right? Like they put you in binds, like the amount of space, like the floor is just so open. Like it makes life really difficult for you. They're a tough team to play against. And I think they've started to get back to that. And that has to be the identity for Pope going forward, right? Like at its core, if you aren't the offense guy, then like, what are you? It becomes like a scary proposition very quickly. And so I think that's a credit. And again, just the way they battle, the way they fight, right? This is a team that was criticized up and down, left and right, that they didn't care. And the film didn't lie. They didn't in November and December. Or if they did, they didn't understand what it takes level competitiveness wise to win at the highest levels of college basketball. They have, put on the work pants and competed and dragged themselves back in games. Big credit to them in that regard, because there have been, again, like think about where it was at halftime against LSU, coming off, losses to Alabama and Mizzou. Mizzou at home, like could have been 1-3 in the league. Lowe was done for the year. Like you look at like a pivot point, essentially a month ago, there was a real chance Kentucky was missing the NCAA tournament. And that would have been, I'm not going to say that would have put Mark Pope on the hot seat next year. That would have been like a hard thing, I think, to ever climb yourself out of that hole. They have done that. And so I give them that to me is the turnaround as much as anything. I think you're correct, though. If we're talking about like getting to where they were in the preseason, I think Florida and St. John's are good examples of that. I think with Kentucky, it's certainly more of a story of, okay, we stabilized this thing. We avoided sudden death in mid-January.
Yeah, I do think coming off the Florida game, I actually was quite impressed with their front court. Like, I'm not saying it was 1-for-1 with Florida's, but like you mentioned, like the battle, and for much of that game, they were out rebounding the Gators. They had more offensive rebounds. Those guys had a little bit of just like pure, brutality, or enough to kind of hang with Florida's brutality while bringing a little bit more, pick and pop ability, a little bit more skill. So I think the fact that they can also be competitive in that way, they can win a little dirty, win a little ugly, which is big. And then, yeah, you're just hoping for some of those shooters to get hot and like start to look at like the downhill ability of Owe. Like, again, I'm not like totally out on this team at all, but it's so it's relative to the number that everyone kind of knows and the expectations preseason. And I was also someone who had them higher than I should have, but it has been fun, and I'm glad that it has just shed or at least we're doing our part to just be like, the like they were not working hard enough and now they are working harder. I feel like it's been a little bit more, and they are an enjoyable watch. I enjoy the way that they play still, and it's almost, you know, more interesting that they're not this team of mega stars that are just, you know, out talenting everyone. They do have a little bit of they've got to play together and to have success, and you see that, you know, during stretches, even if they lose like to Florida, they like you said right off the top, will they dig themselves some holes, but man, will they claw their way out of it at least sometimes.
Yeah, no doubt. Last team is North Carolina. We wanted to touch on North Carolina. Hot start to the year, starts 2-3 in the league, gets swept out in the Bay Area, feels kind of ugly. They go down early against Virginia, and since then they've bounced back. You know, one at Virginia, that's a monster. Beat Duke with the comeback. You know, setback against Miami in a classic hangover game, and now dealing with the Caleb Wilson injury, which is fascinating in a lot of respects. But you know, it seems like they've found some answers maybe with Derek Dixon at times at point guard. At least it's been the lesser of two evils with Kyan Evans, who has really struggled. You know, I think they've, you know, swung and missed in a lot of regards with some of these backcourt additions from the spring. We were a little higher on Bogovac, I think, than what he turned into, but just kind of finding ways to win with this really good front court. And, you know, the good news is it sounds like Wilson will be back here sometime in March, hopefully maybe for that Duke game. That would be great. I haven't seen a full timeline, but that'd be awesome if he could play in that, just in the rivalry and the way he's competitive and how he's wired. But if nothing else, hopefully back for the NCAA tournament, which he's a guy that could certainly make an impact in March.
Yeah, you mentioned Dixon. I think he's been so much fun to watch. And on all these plays, watch his eyes, watch his head. He is just like always looking forward. He never looks down at his own dribble. He doesn't get dirty eyes where he's like scared or spooked. He is just like eyes forward, sees everything in his peripherals. And it just seems like he just keeps his dribble alive till the exact moment he needs to make a play. And then it's either the intelligent pass, nothing too flashy, or it's him, you know, getting to a floater, getting to something under control, knocking down more shots recently. I've just been thoroughly impressed with him as someone who, like, I'll be honest, before we did our kind of preseason look, I did not know anything about this player. And now watching the last couple of games, I feel like I'm his biggest fan. And it's funny in the context too, where I wasn't particularly high on you know, their top point guard prospect coming out of the transfer portal season there, but didn't kind of look at what the alternatives would be. And if I would have known that, you know, Dixon had this in him, I probably would have thought a little bit differently. And, you know, a player I did love going into the year and is someone they've really doubled down on is Vesar. And to see the bully ball he's capable of playing, I mean, this will, you know, give some callbacks to some of the great bigs of North Carolina history. And I think, like a lot of the teams we're looking at, like, man, when it starts to get a little bit ugly, like if you've got just the size and touch around the rim, you might want to simplify. You might want to just give it to these guys and let them work. And Vesar, who again, they're using him as a little bit more of like a play through him on the outside, you know, pop and make plays. And like, yeah, he can make shots, and that's super fun to see too. Sometimes they throw him into the corner and use him as a floor spacer. That's really interesting as well. Pick and roll ball handler. That's a play that Michigan ran for Danny Wolf all the time. Those little elbow pick and rolls for the bigs. That's been pretty fun. And I do think kind of the combination of like the meat and potatoes, like Vesar, and then Dixon, a guy who can play with him in pick and roll, is pretty big. But I of course, we got to talk about the situation with Wilson. And the one thing I do find kind of interesting, and I'll be curious your take on it, is his buckets do not really come in the flow of the offense, which on one hand is like, I don't know how disruptive it's going to be to North Carolina, because it's not like, oh, this is the guy who we like start possessions with, we play through him in the trail post. It's like, this is our break glass in case of emergency ISO guy. And on one hand, it's like, wow, he can bail out some possessions that are not going great and turn 0.6 point per possessions into like 1 point per possessions. But at the same time, like when you watch just the flow of how they play, you know, taking him out, it's not going to be as disruptive as some other star players. So I can't really decide what I like. It obviously hurts North Carolina. Like, let's be clear here. Just like the extent to which is pretty interesting. But if you are a North Carolina fan looking for some kind of hope, like I think when you can play through Vesar, you can play through, you know, Dixon, who's really just seems to be getting better with each game. Like I don't think that the wheels are going to fall off. This is still, of course, a roster that had problems. We want to talk about them as a as a turnaround team, there's they had to turn around from something. That means they're having a negative stretch, but there's still some stuff to like, while also being like, there's very few teams in the country that could absorb a loss like a Wilson loss for some stretch. But yeah, and I think that the news that he might be back also really colors things interestingly, especially when it comes to, you know, what seed could this team be in March.
Yeah, I think the way I would frame it is, it doesn't hurt them when they're playing well, and it hurts them a ton when they're not playing well, right? Because number one, like again, it's the break glass in case of emergency in the half court, right? The ISO buckets. It's the game-changing swings in transition. It's the loud blocks. It's the jumping passing lanes for steals. It's the pick six dunks, right? Like, those matter, I think, a lot. And, you know, again, like defensively, like Caleb Wilson's not an elite like off-ball defender, but like he can like take over a matchup individually. Like if you like, I thought he did a really good job against Duke, guarding the ball. You know, like whenever he had to guard Cam, he did a great job. But if you like put him in a bunch of actions, it gets scary, right? And I think that's the conundrum with the Caleb Wilson. It's also why, again, as you said, I don't think the sky falls for how they play. But like, I think there's some night, like when they play bad, there's some games where like maybe Caleb kept them around that could just get really ugly. And that would be my concern as we head down the stretch. And, you know, their schedule, not the easiest the rest of the way. You know, have NC State here coming up on Tuesday on the road. That's a tricky game. Have Louisville, who's playing much better of late. A Virginia Tech team coming to Chapel Hill that will be hungry, certainly need it for their bubble hopes. Still have Clemson, and then obviously that Duke game. So hopefully Wilson back sooner rather than later. Yeah, I think the point guard play just sort of hit a wall, and they had to make a change to go with Dixon, and I think it's certainly helped their team quite a lot. So yeah, I think overall, big picture, Fawcett, like I would say, you know, Florida and St. John's maybe have more hit their preseason marks, whereas maybe the championship aspiration and at Kentucky and Carolina put on hold a little bit, but you know, still I think impressive for the most part with the ways that these teams have battled. And I do think it's also a good example as you watch, you know, some of these other teams hit the skids a little bit in other parts of the season. Like the narrative doesn't swing as drastically on teams when they lose four games in conference play. If you lose 4 in the non-conference, the world falls down, and it doesn't matter how hard a schedule you played. It's just kind of funny the way these things work. So I think it's a good reminder that, like, you know, like BYU isn't dead just because they like hit a hard patch of schedule. Obviously now the Saunders injury really hurts, but I think we ride way too high and way too low on some of these teams, and Florida and St. John's in particular get examples of like, man, we freaked out and probably never needed to, or we as a stretch people freaked out.
Yeah, well, again, it's you know, people will say it. Well, I hope we are not in the camp of overreacting then in the fall. People who listen to us can, you know, that we're listening to us in the fall can say, but you know, we try to also stay away from the early videos about, oh, Kentucky is dead, or, you know, like this, you know, Florida is dead. And I'm very glad we did, because it's yeah, let's take advantage of the long season. Like, I mean, honestly, there's part of me that loves some of the overreaction, because it's like, hey, let's, like, you know, let's incentivize teams to like go out and like schedule. And if you get a big win, suddenly it's like, oh, extend the coach, everything's great, national championship hopes, all that. But yeah, I'm, you know, I'm sure we're setting up for an off season of all kinds of schedule talk with how some teams are still rolling. So it's pretty interesting. I also think, as we kind of note the style of play, like, man, do you want to have like, it's obviously easier said than done, but man, is it good to have size? Like all of these teams that kind of have more doubled down on size and toughness. The teams that are kind of doubling down on skill and execution, it's tougher to do. There's teams that are doing it, but man, if you just, you know, have the, like, how many teams could even say, let's go put 3 bigs on the floor if they wanted to? So many teams don't even have that luxury. So I do think that, if nothing else as well, and man, the big man market was not hurting, or at least it's hurting in terms of supply. It was not hurting in terms of demand. But I think that watching this, like, man, the premium that is going to continue to be placed on big men who just have so much more of a high floor, that some of the defense and rebounding seems to, like, not only, travel as the old stereotype kind of goes, but it's also a little bit more slump proof. It's a little bit more, hey, if nothing else is working, at least let's go, drag the game into the mud if you've got those guys. So I think that it's nothing really new, because big men really got paid last year and the year before. But you watch these turnarounds, and if you think, like, what would these teams that all have NIL, what do you think they're going to be looking to do? Some of them are going to be like, we've got to improve our point guard play. But I think, honestly, a lot of them are going to need to do that through evaluation. I think there was some misevaluations, not, misallocations of funds, where I think a lot of these teams will be like, we've got to evaluate better when it comes to the guards we bring in, but we have to maintain elite investments in the front court.
Yeah, I totally agree. I'm all in on the big man wave. Get as big as you can. So no question about it. This is a great video. As always, please subscribe if you enjoyed it. Like, subscribe, share. Basketball Review on YouTube, basketballreview.com. Great site. Tons of content as we head down the stretch. And then the Discord. The portal rumors are rumbling. Lots going on. It's a lot of fun. So we hope you check that out. We appreciate you sticking with us. We'll have another video here later this week as we catch up from our flu-driven absence, and back with more soon.